Hey guys, so today we are looking at another video from Alternate History Hub. Today we're looking at a video that he has titled The Most Underrated Era in History, and according to the thumbnail, he's going to be talking about knights with guns. So past the medieval era into the Renaissance era, um, kind of that transition between the medieval knight and then kind of um, when we think of the Napoleonic Wars, kind of when people stopped wearing heavy armor and stuff, like knightly armor and guns. I feel like guns took center stage, aside from the more martial sword and spear and stuff, all like that. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing that because I forgot which centuries this period takes place, but it was that cool transition period between the medieval aesthetic and later on. So I'm really looking forward to if that is what he's gonna talk about. But yeah, I'm really excited to get to the video, so I don't want to daddle on for too long. But before I get to it, if you want to watch the original video by Alternate History Hub, the link to this video is down in the description down below. And if you want to help support my channel in any way, shape, or form, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and maybe consider becoming a YouTube Patreon member. It would really help me out a lot. Now, with that said, and now without any further ado, we ought to just get to it. Let us watch, from Alternate History Hub, the most underrated era in history, in his opinion. Actually, wait, before, I want to ask you all a question. What do you think is the most underrated era in history, in your opinion? For me, my favorite era in history is the Diadochi. Well, it's called the Hellenistic Age. It's from Alexander the Great all the way to, through the successor kingdoms of Alexander until Rome basically takes prominence and absorbs most of them. So that's kind of when it ends. But that era in between with the Diadochi Wars, my favorite. And I don't think it gets talked about enough. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what yours is.
Hi. Every guy has their favorite era of history.
Mm-hmm.
You got your World War II buffs, the Civil War enthusiasts, maybe you love the medieval era, or Shogun Japan. And we all know how often men think about ancient Rome. If you're an American...
It's true. With how much Rome pops up in these videos I watch, I'm unable to ever fully escape Rome. It's always around, so I feel like because of becoming a history buff and history YouTuber, I might think about Rome even more than I would if I hadn't done this.
Then there's a general idea for how Western history is kind of gone. Let me know if this sounds familiar. First, just start off with ancient Egypt, or Greece, then Rome, move on to the fall of Rome, then the Dark Ages, maybe some Vikings. Next are medieval times, then the Renaissance, and then on to Columbus, then the Pilgrims, all culminating with the founders and the start of real history, which is of course the United States. We're the main characters of the world, baby. You could say there's a little historical blind spot. But that's kind of the general way world history is sort of viewed. Whatever the era happens to be, there's some general idea or stereotype about what that period was all about. But I'm here today to tell you about a time period that nobody ever thinks about. It's this one. The period between the 1500s and early 1700s is, in my opinion, the most underrated era in Western history, especially in the United States. Now, my claims have no actual statistical basis. I'm not gonna cite a source on this. It's just kind of a vibe I get. It's my channel, I get to say what I want. From my obtuse and very scientific observations, there's only 3 things your average American might vaguely know of this era. 1, the Renaissance. This is the Renaissance. But that's kind of a limited term. That term makes you think of art and culture and the masters, really just anything with Italy. The second, in the English-speaking world, is usually Shakespeare. Shakespeare in the Elizabethan era is late 1500s, early 1600s. And
definitely that's true in a lot of respects. Obviously, we call this era the Renaissance, and we often think of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and art and culture flourishing. And then definitely Shakespeare. Like I when I went to university and before I graduated with my bachelor's in English, well, yeah, I was an English major. So Shakespeare is kind of like the basically like the ultimate English age major's idol because he's like English major royalty. Definitely a lot of talk about him and his works that I had to read a lot back in my university days, and just a lot to Shakespeare.
Public education, you only hear about Shakespeare in high school English. Imagine future people only knowing about today because of the pop culture of our time. There is one major thing Americans know about this era, one that is just kind of drilled into you at a young age. And you know what it is. Pilgrims.
Yep.
Pilgrims. And Thanksgiving, and Pocahontas. Anything after Columbus and before the Revolution can really just be lumped together into this vague category of pilgrims. What's kind of funny is that, in public education at least, the 1500s to early 1700s is kind of in this weird limbo.
He's not completely wrong. I mean, obviously I can only really speak to American education, but yeah, we've only really talked about like this. Like obviously a lot of what he covered is pretty on point. And it's true, but I've had a lot of pleasure in this channel getting to touch on this era. For instance, like the 30 Years War, for instance, that I think it's probably the biggest series we've covered from this era, and how I really loved it. Like that series and a bit after really were some of my favorite videos, and I think I even said like, yo, the 1600s are kind of underrated. Like obviously when Spain was the most powerful force in Europe and possibly the world, the religious wars, the last bastions of, I also kind of now have dubbed this era the end of the pike, the downfall of the pike, at least like the 1600s specifically. Because yeah, for you guys all know, I love the pike. It's my favorite weapon. Pike formations, and the Spanish tercios decline, because obviously guns took way more center stage. But yeah, I kind of associated this era with the fall of the pike as it became more and more irrelevant to guns and the bayonet. So yeah, but as I've come to touch more of this era, the more I've come to love it on this channel, so I'm happy that the gap is definitely filling.
Like, you just stop learning about anything that goes on in Europe once the Pilgrims actually come over here. Literally anything else across the pond is just never mentioned until the French Revolution.
Yeah.
But back in Europe, like, things were still happening. A lot was happening.
Yeah, the 30 Years War, the 80 Years War, the English Civil War, Protestantism versus Catholicism, the rise and decline of Spain. A lot happened. Oh yeah, obviously I forgot to mention, yeah, we covered the English Civil War from Kings and Generals, so yeah, a lot happened in Europe, and it's true. Everything he's saying is so true. An American thing, it's like, okay, Columbus discovers the New World, and then we don't talk about Europe until freaking the Revolution of France. So it's true. I'm kind of glad he's calling out the American education system, at least where I'm from. I'm not sure if any other American states you do touch on this, but I'm just talking, especially here in California, this is so accurate.
The term for this period is the early modern period. It's not the most attractive name, but it's pretty accurate to what it was. This was a transition period, when the medieval world changed into one that created the conditions for what we would call modern Europe. Wars lasted 30 years, fashion looked like this, borders looked like that, and the medieval...
You know, I kind of also have dubbed this era in my head the Puss in Boots era. Because, like, you know how, like, Puss in Boots from Shrek kind of has the hat and the rapier and the boots? Like, when you kind of touch on this area, especially in Spain, that's kind of what a lot of people wore. So, I kind of in my head have dubbed it the Puss in Boots era. This transition period.
world clashed and adapted to new technologies that were never seen before. Gunpowder, cannons, muskets. That's a whole lot of words just to say, I like the knights with guns. This era was dominated by what is now called pike and shot warfare.
Yes, my favorite. Mwah, mwah. Pikes. Again, I'm obsessed. We watched a movie on this channel. I did a movie reaction to a movie called Alatriste. And it's one of my... I love the aesthetic because I feel like it perfectly captures this era. I mean, it kind of covers to the 30 Years' War and the decline of Spain. And it's probably the only movie I can think of that... Well, we also did cover Cromwell, the 1970s film that technically had pike and shot. But I feel like Alatriste has the best pike and shot adaptation you've ever seen. And he even used clips right there, as you saw during the transition video. Like, yeah, it's amazing. And again, I'm so sorry for those of you who are like frequent watchers, because you always, every time the pike comes up, I'm just all gushing over it, because it really is my favorite weapon, the pike. I just love pike formations, the Spanish tercio, the Swiss pikemen squares, the Macedonian phalanx. Just the pike is the king of the battlefield, which is funny because it had a weird, like, yeah, after the fall of the successor kingdoms of Alexander when Rome took over, basically the pike fell out of major use because obviously the Romans preferred their, weren't known for their using pikes. But something around the medieval and Renaissance, early modern era, the pike just came back out of nowhere and proved to be the king of the battlefield. And again, it made a great comeback, but then it went away because bayonets and guns got more advanced. But I think I predict that in the future the pike will return some way, shape, or form. Maybe in the nuclear apocalypse when the world becomes Fallout. I think the pike will make a comeback again. I feel like it's the true king of the battlefield. That's just my opinion. I'm sorry. I can't get enough of pikes. They're my obsession. They're my favorite weapon. When I play video games, I'm always picking pole arms, not swords. I'm like, oh, get the sword out of the way. I want to use the pole arm. I want to use the pike. Like when I'm playing like Dark Souls or something.
You know ancient Greece? You know how they used the phalanx? That was the unstoppable tactic of its day. Before the Romans put a swift end to all of that.
Yeah.
More predictable freaks.
Always fighting in a phalanx. That's something that I was always pissed off about Rome with, because they got rid of my favorite battle formation and my favorite weapon for a long time. So I was always angry at the Romans for that. That's like, I like Rome, but I also hate that they got rid of the pike, my favorite weapon. But unfortunately, it came back. But yeah, that's something I was never happy with when the Romans kind of got rid of it.
Always takes phalanx. Good old
phalanx.
Nothing beats that.
Afterwards, using big spears was kind of out of fashion through the Empire era to medieval times, all until the Swiss began to form up in a square with pikes. Technically, the Scottish thought of it first, but that didn't really end up well for them. The pike square was a solution to a...
Yeah, I forgot what the Scottish version was. I think William Wallace was noted as using it. But wait, William. Yeah, okay, just making sure I got the name right. But yeah, I forgot, like, okay, wait, what's the name? It's called, the Scottish, Kings and Generals. Gosh darn it, wait. Okay, yeah, it's called the Schildtrod. I'm not pronouncing that right. But yeah, the Scottish, I think it's noted with William Wallace. The problem is that it wasn't mobile, so they got pelted with long distance weapons, which kind of screwed them over. I don't think it was that mobile. But the Swiss perfected that by being able to run and move with their pikes, so you know.
Problem, and that problem was the horse. Throughout the medieval era, cavalry had been dominant on the battlefield, with infantry lacking any real means to defend against it. That was, until the pike square. Bunch of soldiers, very little training, take a big ol' stick and put it out in front. Spain's empire...
Yeah, that's true, and that's a big thing. The prominence and the rise of the Swiss pikemen kind of coincided with the decline of the medieval knight on horseback. Again, because a lot of the medieval era, definitely the knight on horseback, the cavalry knight, was kind of the main force of the battlefield. And knights spend their whole lives training, becoming, combat beast. And then, but the Swiss obviously found with the pike, you can just ward off horses, because horses are smart enough to not want to charge into a full, line of giant pointy sticks. So, and that's the thing, a member of the Swiss pike square is less trained than a medieval knight. One-on-one, a medieval knight would stomp a lone pikeman, in terms of training and maybe even combat experience. But again, when you put all these guys together, like I heard that they just got random people from villages and just trained them to use the pike. And so you created an army that, either a Swiss pike square against a horde of medieval knights. In terms of training, and even in armament and equipment, the medieval knight is superior, but as a whole unit, the Swiss pike square, while less, with less better equipment and less training, is able to stomp into the knights. And it goes to show you, it's just more efficient. You can train regular people quicker, make them more deadly as a cohesive unit, and probably less expensive compared to a knight. So that's why the rise of the pike and it kind of like brings a decline in the cavalry superiority of the battlefield, and even the knight itself, because again, that's the power of the pike. I'm sorry, I just can't get enough of it.
In part was built from dominating with the pike and shot, as they introduced the shot. Musketeers on the flanks of the square that could give the formation some ranged attack, and also would retreat inside the square when need be. And I absolutely love the muskets at this specific time. At first they weren't even technically muskets. The early muskets required a stick to aim and a wick to fire, as it was too unwieldy to prepare and aim with two hands. This was gunpowder warfare in its absolute infancy.
Yeah, he's using clips from the movie Alatrista, which again, feel free to watch my reaction to that. It's a great film. But yeah, again, best depiction of how this was used.
A technology so young that it was seen as black magic by its contemporaries. Didn't really help their case that they had their own guilds and protected their secrets. So yeah, they did kind of look suspicious. This period's so neat to me because while guns do still exist, tactics are still with swords and spears. Cavalry, for some reason, decided to adopt guns too, so for a brief while, cavalry no longer did the whole charge thing. It would just circle outside the pike square and shoot occasionally with pistols and blunderbusses, which is just kind of hilarious. This is like if you just clashed together a bunch of unrelated tactics and technologies. Pike formations like the Greek phalanx, guns that were crafted by hand and treated as specialists, and cavalry that shot using pistols in
Again, like, this is such a cool transition era, because when we think of like the knight, I feel like it's easy to just lump it solely in the medieval era, and we think of the knight with the sword and the lance, you know, and then we jump to the Renaissance where the knight's kind of more gone, or like later on where the knight's gone and guys don't wear heavy armor anymore but just carry like guns and stuff. This cool in between where we had knights with pistols just running around shooting people. Like it really is just a cool, interesting visual. This weird like in between era where multiple forms of war, the pike, which, you know, an evolution, I feel like, of the phalanx, the pike and shot, meshed with medieval cavalry wearing the aesthetic with the armor, mixed with the advancement of guns. It's this era that's just so unique, and that so many different eras kind of clashed here before it transitions to, you know, what we think of like with the Napoleon era and whatnot. But like this weird mishmash of different eras all colliding in one. It's really cool. I love it.
Full armor. Technically not knights, but it's close enough. And this is why Warhammer Fantasy has a superior aesthetic to 40k. That's right, I said it. Even if you have never seen these factions, you probably know what they're all about. The Empire might as well have Holy Romans slapped in front of it, because that's what it is. Kislev is basically just Eastern Europe, winged hussars and all, and don't get me started on the vampire counts. Ironically, there is a faction I could accurately describe as true medieval, with knights and lances, and the absolute absence of gunpowder, and that's Bretonnia. Bretonnia f***ing sucks. For me personally, I've kind of lost interest in the standard medieval era. Maybe I've just been overexposed to it, but I don't know, lately I've just been drawn to this more. At the end of the day, you know, I like both, but one side has really goofy hats, and I like goofy hats.
Exactly.
Now I think about it, you know, it's kind of, tasteless to say that certain wars were neat and cool, considering a lot of people died. But I don't know, what's the rule on that? After a few centuries, I think you can say that, right? It's fascinating, at least. Fascinating because pike and shot was just this anomaly in warfare. It can't really be compared to anything else. The states we're familiar with in many parts did exist, assuming you weren't in the Balkans, I guess. And what's cool about that is a lot of countries that aren't the strongest today were at some point in this era an absolute powerhouse. Like Poland-Lithuania. Look at that. Poland-Lithuania dominated the East. The Winged Hussars were the—
And then the Winged Hussars arrived! Sorry. Oh my, what a great Sabaton song. But yeah, like I said, we've seen so many videos on this channel where different eras of Europe, I cover a lot of Europe, where different, like, kingdoms were the top dog. Napoleonic era, France was the top. Around the 30 Years' War all the way to the early, like, 18th century, the Swedish war, probably the most powerful army until the Great Northern War, where they fell. You know, the British were the most powerful force in the world after, like, I feel like post-Napoleonic wars onward. And yeah, the Spanish, obviously, were the most powerful force until their decline, which started around, like, what, the 80 to 30 Years' War era. So yeah, we've seen so much where one nation will rise to become the most powerful and then decline. It's just always like that. Like, no one stays on top forever, unfortunately.
military force on the battlefield, even while cavalry in the west was losing significance. Ironically, Poland was the terror to Russia, which was coming out of its own time of troubles. And for a century there, another major power in the east was Sweden. Despite their lower population, Sweden had turned the Baltic Sea into a Baltic lake, all thanks to the tactical genius of warrior kings like Charles XII and Gustavus Adolphus. It took a coalition of Poland, Russia, and Austria to bring them down. Funnily enough, Charles would hide out in Ottoman territory once the war turned against him. Oh yeah, the Ottomans. This era was the golden age for the Ottomans. In a way, they brought on its beginning with the fall of Constantinople, and their decline didn't really begin until the late 1600s after the Battle of Vienna, though that's debatable. In a time when the Spanish were colonizing the world and France was solidifying its kingdom, the Balkans just remained under Ottoman control, unable to gain independence until the 19th century. And it makes sense why. I mean, look at that. In the 17th century, the Ottomans controlled land from Vienna to the Persian Gulf, and from Mecca to Tunisia. Almost half of the Mediterranean and pretty much the entire Black Sea were either tributaries or directly in their control. It really is insane that there was even a Battle of Vienna to begin with, when you just remember where Vienna was on a map. Even crazier that it was the second time. The Austrian-Habsburg rivalry with the Ottomans was really something. Like, in the span of 250 years, they fought like 14 wars, which in hindsight is actually quite ironic considering how the two would fight side by side with one another in their very last war. It's kind of poetic.
Wow.
Speaking of potentially the last war, Ukraine. What we think of as Ukraine during this time was controlled by, well, nobody. Well, technically Poland, but it was just on a map. This was an actual no man's land in Europe. The collapse of the Golden Horde centuries before created a power vacuum. The flat plains were roamed by Crimean Tatars, who frequently raided Slavic lands to enslave and plunder. This only got worse with aid from the Ottomans, considering the Ottomans were buying those slaves. This land was simply called the Wild Fields for a time, a vast plain of grasslands ruled by nobody, settled by nobody, where the only people that would venture into this land were tough settlers, nomads, or criminals who wished to get away from jurisdiction. Sound familiar? This is where we got the Cossacks. I just find it fascinating that a part of Europe was unsettled for so long that a lot of the settlements there are just as young as cities in the United States. Hey, speaking of dysfunctional states, the Holy Roman Empire. Dave Curry gets made fun of a lot. And yeah, I get it. It was a mess. Just an absolute mess. But those flaws are why I love it. Like how people love the deformed squish face of a pug. All of this was just divided into assorted lands between minor lords, major lords, independent cities, grand duchies. It was horrible, but it somehow lasted 1,000 years. Germany in general was just the worst place to be during this time. Like, we had the 30 Years' War, Protestant Reformation, general famine, soldiers committed vast war crimes dressed like this. It was a wild time. Charles V is kind of the embodiment of this entire era. He was the sovereign over territory that we can't even fathom today being a part of the same region or government. And for the most part, the largest wars were fought with paid mercenaries. The very concept of a professional soldier was kind of strange. Mercenaries had always existed, but they were on the sidelines. But now, an average man could be paid to be a soldier as a career, without being a lord or owning any land. And that had ethical questions. Like, at least in the US, being a soldier is seen as a whole thing. But in times like the 30 Years' War, a soldier was someone paid by your local lord just to protect his interests. Even if those interests were aligned with yours religiously, like being a Catholic, the fighters themselves were still distrusted, and not really liked. This is probably because if the lord didn't pay them, they'd rampage through the countryside. This was a transition period. There were still kinks to figure out. The Holy Roman Empire never figured out those problems. So yeah, in this era, we saw the Swedes, the Poles, the Spanish, and the Turks all at their height. And really the ones who would come to dominate the coming centuries were still getting things figured out. Hell, England executed their king and didn't have one for a decade. There's so much I can't even get into. Like, this whole era was during what was called the Little Ice Age. So temperatures were colder than usual, and winters were harsher. Many theorize that that was what drove this period to have such conflict. Historian Hugh Trevor Roper even deemed a portion of this the general crisis because of how many revolts and wars were ongoing in Western Europe. Everything I just said throughout this whole video can be dissected a million ways, so consider anything I said just riddled with asterisks. Like the 30 Years' War. Sure, it was a conflict driven by religion, but it was primarily politics and noble squabbles. The Ottomans were a constant threat to the Habsburgs, but so were the French. And the French sometimes even allied with the Ottomans to get at Austria. This was an exception to the rule, though. Everyone hated the French for doing this. The entire point of this video is that I think this era is incredibly underappreciated. And while it's crude to mainly point at the warfare and say, hey, isn't that neat? I know my audience. I know what got you guys into history. Vibes and aesthetics aren't the smartest way to get people interested, but it gets people interested. And at least from an American perspective, it's hilarious, because while all of this was going on in Europe, for us it was really just this. Or this. Oh damn, I completely forgot to talk about pirates. So, if you're interested in learning more, I've got some sources and channels I think you should check out. Sand Roman History is my favorite channel of this era.
Yeah, he has great videos. I've covered a few Sand Roman history videos, mainly about his pike videos, like the Swiss pikemen and the pike formations that ruled the world. So I do watch a lot of his videos, and yeah, I didn't know this took place during the Little Ice Age. That kind of makes a lot of sense about a lot of things, and it's true. The aesthetic is just that unique. Is the video done, or is the rest gonna be advertisement?
He has videos in the HRE and the loves elves, and he hates Bretonia, and his stuff is pretty good.
Wow.
Yeah, he's done. Okay, so I'm going to end the video right here, but yeah, overall, like I said, I've covered this era more on this channel, with the 30 Years' War, the English Civil War. Overall, just a great era. Definitely a unique one in human history, as the ultimate transition era, I feel, where so much ideas just clash to create something so unique, you know? So, yeah, I'm gonna end the video right here, and let me know what you think of this era. With that said, and now without any further... Actually, no, I just end the video. I don't...